Alright, making another video on the economic stuff. Different approach this time. I'll use words again. Yeah, try to do something constructive here in terms of outlining the overview of where we are so far, kind of thing, based on these words. So if there's words you think I left out, important concepts, provide them, and whatnot, and even definitions. So I'll make this video, and then after I make it, I think I'll put this list of words in the description, but I'll augment it, I think, appropriately with little declarations that I might add in here, things that are pretty solid as ways of describing the reality of the circumstance. So anyway, an overview. So what you have is a system of value barter. So just it's no real different than it was 10,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, in the sense that people have value and they exchange it with each other, and this is the mechanism that we do the barter in, but it's the same thing. We're basically just exchanging value, and value is stuff, cool stuff I found. I found the corn snake the other day. Still have them. I don't know what to do with them exactly, but corn snakes are cool because they're little constrictors and and they're pretty and whatnot. So it's stuff. It's got some value, maybe, perhaps. And the stuff can be, stuff in the future and stuff in the past. So stuff that's already made, and there's also stuff coming up. So there's going to be new stuff that's going to arrive. Like when you make a bridge, then all of a sudden you have a road to some place, and that has value. You can charge a toll and all that kind of stuff. So there's stuff that's in process. It's becoming stuff. It isn't quite hatched yet, but it'll be stuff tomorrow, and you can own the stuff that will be stuff tomorrow. And so you can have that kind of stuff. Cash, you can have. Cash is like any other commodity. Yes, this cash happens to be the transaction commodity, the one we use to switch back and forth between each other as a universal statement of value. It's you can use it to buy anything, and it has an exchange value that's already established. It makes life really easy and all that kind of crap. But like any commodity, you could have gold, or you could have cash, or you could have some other commodity. But cash is the only probably truly synthetic commodity that is durable, let's call it, in principle. Then you have your labor, your work, your capacity to do labor is another thing you have, another thing you possess that you can put on the market and sell. And it can be put on the market in some sort of voluntary way, like, yes, I'm really cool, you want to rub my hiney. Or it could be put on the market in some negative way, like I'm a slave and wage slave, and I have to do this, or my family dies, and blah 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 blah. And so you can bargain from positive positions, or you can be forced to bargain from very negative positions. And just logically, as a decent human being, you would say it would be better if people could bargain from a fair position where they weren't extorting me, and yet I wasn't exploiting them. So extortion and exploitation are probably a couple of good words to throw in here. They're preachy words, but they are relevant to what goes on in the economy. So we'll write them down. And exploitation of desperation is usually is the real thing we're saying is being exploited, essentially, in the bargaining process, because this is barter, right? So so I guess what I'm saying is that yes, this system is duplicating barter, and you would assume through civilization, through advancement, that we'd want to come up with a system of barter that works for people. Some people would say this system works because they say it's okay if people are abused and beaten down and used up, as long as it's not them. And I say those people are assholes. So I could write that down, but that's probably not suitable to what's intended with this video. Alright, so anyway, so this acquiring of stuff thing, you can end up acquiring what's called surplus, right? Extra stuff. And you can rent that to people. And so, when, I threw these words together, surplus, rent, interest, investment, debt, and liability. I put rent and interest together for right now because, we think we're paying interest on the debt, but we're really paying rent on the debt. We rented money from the rich. We rented anything we bought with deficit money. We didn't buy the stuff. We rented it. We leased it. And we have a perpetual contract because we're never going to pay the debt off. So rent is a different word conceptually. And I think people would better understand how badly we have done this living thing if they understood that, yes, renting is not a good idea. The federal government should not be in the business of renting services. That's really for the people. The government shouldn't turn us into renters. So that's the surplus can be in the form of it's stuff, and the stuff can be cashed in the sense that you can, I don't know if I have the word for that here, but maybe mortgage should be put down. I mean, that seems like it's probably a relatively important word. Monetization, mortgage, a way of capitalizing, turning it into capital. Anyway, so yes, and then you can rent directly. You can just lend money, lend your surplus, or you can invest it, which is, there's a subtle difference, right? You're lending it to a purpose that isn't immediate, in terms of somebody's not going to just pay you interest. You're likely going to the payoff comes with some completion or accomplishment. Obviously, investments in businesses is kind of a dicey in-between thing, because it could be a big payoff like Apple, or it could just be that you get your dividend every month or year or whatever. So that's what you do, what people do with surplus. And as they do this, deeper into this argument, well, you can draw conclusions about whether there's any kind of valves or control mechanisms that control these things. So this is basically, when we're looking at this system, we're basically looking for, where are we losing steam? Where's the fire heat not getting to the boiler? Where's the inefficiencies in the system? And the lack of regulation, the lack of control. How does it get out of control? And I suppose a fundamental argument about why we're even having an argument about the economy is that part of it has gotten out of control, in that the wages have gone way down, and the percentage of the economy owned by very few people has gone way up. And so that stuff is all owned by very few people who really don't know what to do with it. They have so much of it. And I wrote that creates two problems. Since I'm on that subject, I might as well go there. This isn't going to be as perfectly linear as I would have liked it. But as the rich get richer, they begin to bid up prices. They begin to bid up prices on commodities and bid down price on debt. So as the rich get richer, they have to pay too much for their investment things, and so the prices just keep going up because they don't know what to do with the money. And at the same time, they're competing with each other to rent their stuff, so rents go down. So they're inflating prices, at the same time they're deflating prices. So there's a balance that can exist there, where on the one side they're giving you the money for free almost, and on the other side they're making you pay a huge amount for everything you buy because they've bid up the cost of it. But I would argue, yes, the balance doesn't exist, and that monarchy is not balance. And we know what monarchy led to in terms of, we know what monarchical societies look like, and they didn't look good. It wasn't pretty. It had a really dirty, the substance of the circle was really, really dirty, and it wasn't until you got to the very little inside that you had any candy. So, it's not a good circle. It's not the way you want to, it's not what you hope for in life, is, feudalistic monarchies. Anyway, so then you got debt and liability. That's, is created because of people renting. So that's their obligation becomes a debt, and and liability to pay, either to finance the rent payments or eventually pay the debt, whatever form it might be in. Alright, so what we've gleaned out of this conversation between me and Nick is that banking digits are bank checks. I mean, I've gleaned this as a way of describing bank digits. So bank digits are just checks written on the bank. So it's the credibility of the banks, the integrity of the bank is what's guaranteeing those digits, just like the integrity of the government is what guarantees the cash, and how many checks it's written on whatever equity it has. So you could argue it's the same scenario. And that if you looked at each bank as a nation state, you can understand that some nations are financially much better off than other nations, and some nations are going to go bankrupt and other nations aren't, and all that kind of thing. So all digits aren't equal in the sense that all banks are not equal, and especially in a crisis, some percentage of the banks will be profoundly unequal, and their checks won't be worth the typey it took to make them. And that's the danger of this digital money and its equalization. So another conclusion gleaned from the conversation, a statement that I'm confident in, is that these bank checks, the checks are cashed using Federal Reserve accounts. And the key word there would be cashed. So let's put that word in bold because it's important to this thing conceptually. So the Federal Reserve accounts always traditionally were made of cash. They had cash in them, and each bank had one of these accounts, and the books would be done, and Bank A would owe Bank B in the end a certain number of checks. When the checks were all done out, one guy owes the other guy some money, and the cash would be moved from one reserve account, one vault, to the other guy's vault, and it would be moved as cash payment. And that's how digits were resolved into something more substantive than just a bank promise. And it cleans it all up and turns it all back into something real. Okay, so I don't know how important this collateral is, an important word. And it relates to the FDIC thing more than anything else, that the only kind of loans that are supposed to be the only kind of deposits that are supposed to be FDIC insured are fundamentally collateralized loans. There's a very specific kind of banking you're supposed to have to do for FDIC and deposits. So let's say I have a bank, and 80% of my deposits are FDIC insured. Then I have to have 80% of my business, my equity, the money I've invested as a bank, has to be in safe investments. It has to be in bonds, or it has to be in very within the rules of what's going to be insured as a savings account. Okay, so savings accounts are FDIC insured. Checking accounts are FDIC insured. These are representations of people's equity which they wish to just make mobile and secure. They don't wish to make huge profits. They're just trying to preserve their money. The government's respecting the fact that they're just trying to preserve their money, and so they've insured them. Now, since we're on the subject of the FDIC insurance, it's important to understand that the FDIC does not insure the money like a car. It insures it in the sense that, well, this is what I wrote. FDIC insurance guarantees a liability to pay cash. It doesn't guarantee who pays the liability. Okay, so all the FDIC insurance is intended to do is to say, we're guaranteeing your money, and we're going to make sure the bank pays. That's pretty much what it's saying. And obviously it can't make a bankrupt institution pay. So it'll pay in for the bankrupt institution. But through the process of the bankruptcy resolution, I'm sure the government will intend to get the money back. It's not the government's obligation to pay for the failure of the bank. That should be the obligation of those who invested in the bank. Yeah, bankruptcy is a word I got to throw in here, because bankruptcy law is what's, more than anything else too, is also terribly corrupted the function of the system, because people keep talking about their risk-taking, and they're not paying for their risk-taking. The bankruptcies are paid by the consumers, by the other, the people who will be impacted, who had nothing to do with the bankruptcy. And theoretically, that's not the way it should be. It's like in the olden days, your house, your family, you were sort of responsible for each other. So if somebody, if my brother fucked some people over, got into a huge mess, the people he screwed over would show up at my door, because it was my brother, and they'd expect me to fix it, if I had the capacity to. If I was Mr. Rich Moneybags, they'd pretty much say, you're not going to be Rich Moneybags anymore because your brother has a huge liability he's created, and you're going to pay it. So there was a sense of honor and responsibility. And certainly you can see that in Asian cultures where, they have an honor code, which probably helps them a little bit in these circumstances. But yeah, you pay for your mistakes. None of this freeloader crap that the rich pull now, where they just say, oh no, that's my other business that went bankrupt. I have no responsibility for all that liability. It's bankrupt. That means the consumers have to pay. I don't have to pay. So yeah, I mean, in theory, people the depth of accounting for oneself and being accountable. There's no depth to the accountability, and that's a fundamental flaw in any system, a lack of depth in accountability. That's why cops suck. Alright, so where were we? Yeah, profit, income. The word taxes down here, which probably should go up somewhere in here too. After tax, profit, obviously, and income. But these things, probably got to add the word inheritance in here somewhere. Because these things are important in the sense that, okay, so you made some money, cool, you're rich. What does that mean? Does it mean your people are rich forever now? They're owners, they have a better stake, and in perpetuity, they will be bidders and raise the bidding price. So that's my biggest grief with this idea of inheritance, is it creates an automatic price inflation, because things never go back to their natural price. They're always based on this level of pricing that's built into the system, because things don't go back on the market. So the paintings are essentially pulled off the market and owned forever, and it's just very corrosive, to any fair pricing in the market, the perpetual ownership. You don't have to pay for it with working dollars anymore, or stuff you acquired, honestly. The barter is now, completely distorted by generational ownership, of a giant segment of it. Alright, inflation's an important word. That one, I don't really know what to do with yet. you know, it's just obviously it's about price inflation, and price inflation is created by you know, a surplus of stuff chasing other stuff, right? You know, the exchange rates get distorted somehow. Something becomes a commodity and its price inflates. It's like you know, it'd be very nice if, you know, the gold is a very useful element in industrial purposes, especially in electronics, and yet we can't apply it. We can't gain its full efficiency or functionality in our lives because it's been identified as something else and some other perceived value, and that's completely distorted its price, and so we lose its value in one area through that process. It's inflation, but that's how a lot of inflation is. It's sort of specific. You know, it can be specific to energy, or it can be specific to food, or it can be specific to one element of our lives. And generally speaking, they try to make inflation into some net number, depending on what they put in some basket that says this is what life costs now. And you know, I would make the obvious accusation that they do that for their own purposes, to draw a picture that, you know, where the crayon drawing is pretty colors and no fire and no bombs, and you know, they can draw whatever they want with the crayons that way, because they get to choose the colors, kind of thing. So anyway, but I won't go into a lot of that, but you can sort of just get the idea of how inflation would happen if wealth keeps getting acquired and every year the prices keep going up, because the bidding prices have to keep going up, because some stuff is always going to be limited stuff. Pretty much. Alright, so the reserve accounts at the Treasury are basically just where the money is supposed to be created through, the mechanism it's created through. It's supposed to be cash, vault cash, technically. And the only distinction between it and regular cash is it's in a vault. Technically, that was supposed to be the distinction. Clearly, with quantitative easing and the creation of fake reserve digits, you know, just reserve digits that were never printed and then put into the Federal Reserve as cash, it's distorted that function. And you know, we don't know how they're going to resolve those digits. Because if they print them as money, obviously there's $1.2 trillion in circulation and there's $4 trillion in the reserve account. You can see that if that's converted into cash, then cash will be diluted, which means your buying power with cash is diluted, which is essentially inflation. So anyway, and then taxes are also taken out to the Treasury. So essentially there can be bank checks written to the Federal Reserve, which means the bank pays the Federal Reserve. You know, so when you pay your taxes, yeah, you're paying it with a check, but you're paying it out of a bank's account. And the reserves, they'll be taken out of the reserves